Those of you who have not been to FiRe before, I'll just tell you briefly, our friend David Brin started this all off with a television pilot program he had created and called Architects. And the idea is to find the smartest people you can find, put them in a room, give them an insolvable problem, generally outside of their area of expertise if possible, and then let them work on it night and day for about 3 days, and then they report out. And when they report out, there have to be judges. In this case, here they are. And they actually judge them. It's not a pass. It's a judge. So you can screw this up. I will say they haven't so far. And in fact, almost everything these teams have attempted have been now put into place in the real world. So it's pretty cool in the sense of if you're a believer that intelligence, dedication, and passion, when not affected by political parties and other crazy things, can actually solve world problems. This is the team at FiRe that has consistently shown that to be the case. So I welcome all of you to this particular challenge. Glad you're here. I'm going to quickly read through the names of those who are participating, not in the order that you see them. As judges, I have with me Richard Marshall, CEO of X-SES, and Stephen Sprague, CEO of Wave Systems, founding member of INVNT IP, and Richard, I will note, is also on the advisory board of INVNT IP. And our challenge team this year consists of Barry Briggs, IT Chief Architect and CTO, Microsoft; Ty Carlson, Senior Manager, Technology Program Management, Digital Products Group at Amazon; Jeff Hudson, CEO of Venafi; Pete Nicoletti, Chief Information Security Officer, VirtuStream; Eric Openshaw, Vice Chairman and U.S. Technology, Media, and Telecommunications Leader, Deloitte; Larry Smar, Director, CalIT2, UC San Diego Irvine Partnership; UCSD; Václav Vinchelek, President, Pacific Coast Information Systems Limited; and Jerry Woodall, Founder, Woodall Tech and National Medal of Technology Laureate. I would say if the problem can be solved, we have the guys on the stage who can do it. That's the good news. The bad news is this problem, I think, is the hardest you've ever had. And that includes, as you know, problem sets that were pretty much impossible. So if those were difficult or impossible, this one is worse. I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about what the problem is, because that's my job. And I'm then going to open it up to my fellow judges to add more difficulty if I haven't thought of everything that's wrong. In a nutshell, the problem is in a time when crown jewel intellectual property drives every single part of the world's economy, there are nations now which have, wisely from their perspective, decided to forego R&D expenditures and all that time and to just simply take that stuff, take that crown jewel intellectual property and benefit from it. If it were a nuisance problem or a low-level problem, we wouldn't be sitting here. Personally, I've come to the conclusion that we as a planet, we as a global economy cannot sustain that level of parasitism very long. And in fact, we've already seen whole sectors destroyed. Exhibit A would be the telecoms equipment sector. So it's not what could happen, it's what is happening right in front of us to whole sectors of strategic parts of the world economy if no one pays attention very long, or if that IP transfer, that illegal transfer, cannot be thwarted. So every CEO in the world, whether they're in global farming, whether they're in pharma, whether they're in chip manufacturing or cars, is faced with a problem which they are relatively quickly now coming to see, and that is they have a new problem that they didn't dream of, and they have no good way of solving it. I'll give you a couple of examples. Two quotes that are worth your knowing. Going back not too long, a few years, we had a quote originally from Jonathan Edwards, MI5, in 2007, who that early said to the top 300 CEOs of Britain that all of you have been penetrated. That was surprising. More recently, General Keith Alexander, the head of the NSA, has said exactly the same thing about the United States. Every target has been penetrated. And there's a quote that's often attributed, I think it is his, that this has resulted in the greatest transfer of wealth in the history of the earth. I'll just point out a couple of obvious things. Nortel Corporation, the crown jewel company of the country of Canada, doesn't exist anymore. China was, now we know, inside their network for 9 years, apparently did a great job, and there is no Nortel now. They simply don't exist. RSA, arguably our most important security non-defense company, easily penetrated, and all the master keys taken by China. And finally, Coke Corporation is an example of how wide this goes in terms of topics, was trying to purchase a competitor company in China and failed to make the purchase because, it seems, every time they made a bid, every time they made a new strategy, that was taken by China, by the government, before they could actually implement the strategy. So they never got the purchase. They didn't even get to the point where they could get declined. So I mentioned this last because people in general have failed to estimate the value of IP properly. And in fact, we've just in Britain seen a devaluation, an attempt to devalue how important IP is. I know that Congress has wanted to know, give us the number. How important is this? There are no good numbers. The normal number is 390 billion in Europe and 400 billion in the United States. Those are crazy numbers. They're probably way too small. And I think if you are tracking with me on this, if you look at the global GDP and ask yourself how much of that does not depend upon technology, you'll get a good number. You better start that way instead of seeing what you think the replacement part for a Ford drivetrain is, which also was stolen. So I have difficulty thinking of things in the world economy that don't in some way or other, whether it's a farm tractor or a new drug, depend upon technology. I think that even the simplest things, when Elon Musk redesigned the Tesla, he put the door handle 6 inches down. It took another 6 months to wait for new production to happen. It was worth it to him to have that done properly, because that intellectual property of where should you put a door handle would have screwed up the whole thing for him. So there are these things like, what is an assembly line, how does it work, what's the order, which we don't normally call IP. What are the documents in a merger negotiation? What's the strategy of the CEO's mind? Those things don't carry value on the books in companies, but they are all IP, and they're all important. So my guess is that most of the global GDP today, whether it's trade negotiations of fruits and vegetables, whatever it is at risk if there is a nationwide attempt, top-down, to use that without paying for it. So your charter today and during this week is to try to solve this problem. I will note that I've had the great good fortune of being able to travel around during the last 6 months on behalf of INVNT and talk to people who I would guess you'd all respect on this issue. And I think it's fair to say that 2 of 1, now these are people like leaders of U.S. trade, leaders of State Department, leaders in the Department of Commerce, White House, the head of the NSA, the head of the FBI, head of MI5, MI6, and GCHQ, the Cabinet Minister's Office in the UK. So these are really smart people who have already thought about this problem a long time. And in every case, they agreed about the severity, and in almost every case, they hadn't quite gotten their arms around the problem the way that I'm describing it to you. In other words, that the economics of this are a deep security threat as well as a deep threat to their own economies. So there is now a joining of interests from the military and intelligence perspective and the commercial perspective, recognizing that if you destroy the economy of a country through a concerted effort like this, you have destroyed their ability to respond in a military fashion as well. And obviously that's what the United States did during the Cold War to the Soviet Union. So, in a different way. So we have a pretty obvious problem in front of you, and the question is what to do. I will caution you that there's a lot of language out there about how to solve this problem, which I find at least to be meaningless. And I'll give you an example. While we were in the UK, we were assured by very smart people, some of whom I just mentioned, that the problem is in hand because simply by getting better behavior from using current tools from CEOs, they could solve 80% of the problems. And that's a quote. Well, it's probably true, but it is probably also true that military-grade teams that were nation-sponsored going after anybody after they'd done those nice things would be 100% successful. So, in other words, I'd like you to think of a pyramid of IP in each country, in each company. And even if you protect the bottom 80%, which might be payroll lists or ID cards and names and so on, that top 1%, which is the Coke secret recipe, is what the teams are going after. And that's what you need to protect. That's the crown jewel IP. And our conversation this week should be about, did you succeed in protecting the crown jewel IP? Not the 80% below that, which is nice to do, but not going to save any of the problems here in terms of security or economics. There are obvious ways to perceive this. I'll mention a few of them. The general name for these attacks is APT attacks, advanced persistent threats, because a military-grade team will come into your company. You probably won't know it's there. 90 to 95% of the victims don't know what's going on. They will stay there essentially forever. After the initial attack, there's a period of time when they want to find the exact thing they were after. Once they find it, they don't go away. They put a marker there, a back door, and they can come back every 3 months or every week, whatever they want to do, and they do. So as in Nortel's case, they don't just go away, take your stuff once. They'll be there for the rest of the time until your company's gone. So it is persistent. It's not a single threat. The teams, in fact, are military grade. You should assume that, and the Mandiant report seems to confirm exactly that the PLA is one of the teams that are involved. All companies have been penetrated, so this is a non-trivial problem. Phishing is being used more and more often, and there are various new techniques. So someone will call up, it's human engineering, or they'll send an email. It looks like it's your CEO. Please click on this PowerPoint. You do it, and that's the end of that, malware. Employees tend to be the largest problem. Most of the thefts happen through someone inside the company. But cyber is now so pervasive and so useful that that's probably shifting. Students and interns also are, unfortunately, a strong source of loss. So we've just had a bunch of students last week from China who were arrested because they had a ringmaster, a handler, who was a registered student, but actually he was paying $400,000 for IP from a university, from NYU. So that's a problem. Travel is a problem. When a CEO travels to some country and brings his laptop or her laptop, before you get through the TSA lookalikes, your stuff's done. So you've already been, and if you leave something in your hotel room for overnight, it'll get scanned and so on. There are lots of ways that you don't recognize where everything on your laptop or your phone has been transferred before you leave the country. Putting a research center into a country whose whole point is to steal your research is probably not a brilliant idea, because they tap the phones, they tap the email, and it doesn't take very long before conversations between the home office and so on. And in the same sense, training employees in those situations to do exactly what you do with your secret sauce leads to the loss of your secret sauce. So there are these and other ways that things can go bad, all of which you'll have to look at as you solve this problem. And I'll just try to give you one goal here, and I think that it's pretty much, in my mind, a true statement that if you succeed in solving this problem, you will change world economic history. The way history is moving right now is the inventors are getting trashed and the thieves are making a lot of money. If you succeed in creating a checklist for CXOs that could bring this, we're calling it zero loss, of course, 5% would be pretty good. But whatever the low number is, if you actually do something which hasn't been done before and create a good list that can be useful, we'll publish the dickens out of it all around the world. And you will, if it's acted upon, you will have changed world economic history. This has definitely not been done before, and it has been tried. So we've tried to point you to a couple of lists. There are lists that GCHQ has worked on with other intelligence communities. There are lists that the FBI has put out for what CEOs should do. As far as I can tell, they're not useful. I mean, they're not useful for this 1% of the top of the pyramid. They're very useful for the bottom 80%. So if you can succeed in protecting that 1%, you will have added something that does not exist today, neither in Britain nor in the United States or anywhere else that I know of. So it is a truly useful, challenging, difficult, interesting problem that you're being assigned, and it will have wide result if you actually succeed in figuring it out. Richard and Stephen, would you like to add to this?
Let me add a couple of comments. Obviously, what we're talking about is out-of-the-box thinking. So you've got a completely blank piece of paper. And those are not just words, that's a concept. I don't want you to think, well, I can't do this because it's illegal. Forget that. I'm serious.
Yeah.
I'm a lawyer. I practice in this field. I deal a lot with technologists, and they will tell me, well, gee, Rich, I can't do that because it's illegal. That's like me telling them how to do their job. Forget the legalities. That's, I think, a recent Washington talking head said it's irrelevant. So for the purposes of our discussions this week, legal is irrelevant. Now here's why. We've got to look at new methodologies. We can always change the law if necessary, but we have to look at new methodologies. We're not dealing primarily with nation state actors. Those are the ones that might be regulated or influenced by international law or criminal law. We're dealing with individuals who are outside the jurisdiction of our country and who are outside the jurisdiction of even their home countries, even if their home countries were in a mood to take some kind of legal action. So forget all of that. Look at a technical solution and look at policy solutions and be extremely imaginative. Extremely imaginative. Almost free-form thinking, brain trust type of stuff. Don't be constrained. Nothing is off the table as far as I'm concerned.
You're right. Stephen?
I guess I would add some anecdotes. I think they're just some great examples, and I think they help the thinking in this direction. Every major corporation on the planet's gone out and bought encryption to meet the compliance issue. Dumbest thing you can do, because encryption doesn't meet the compliance. Proof the device was encrypted when lost meets the compliance. Yes, you had to have encryption to accomplish that, but if you couldn't assert the proof, then you actually didn't achieve the compliance. When the CEO called up and said, so, was it encrypted? It had everything on it. And you go, well, you probably have less evidence than how much you spent for lunch. Yet you spent millions of dollars on infrastructure. And so I would just say it's important to understand what the real problem is we're trying to solve, and not just the technical bits. I think the other thing that's enormously helpful in this context is as much as it's possible to avoid the technical conversation. It's really easy to talk about we should have RSA certificates of this kind and keys and everybody gets instantly lost in that. And it's been the hidden language of the security experts which make this such a complicated problem people can't think about it. And we've used terms like only known devices. We could spend hours defining what known is, but it becomes a much easier thing to explain to the average person who may or may not know a lot about technology, but they understand that if I have a completely unknown thing, the concept that I'm going to trust it is a really interesting aspect. And I think try and eliminate the word risk from the conversation. I think risk is the mistake. I think that if we approach this from more of a health and safety concept as opposed to a risk concept, loss is unacceptable. So is it politically appropriate for, pick a big oil company, to kill somebody once a week? No. From a profitability perspective, it really isn't going to affect, let's pick on ExxonMobil. If they killed one person a week, it just isn't going to affect the overall global profitability of ExxonMobil. However, it's politically incorrect to kill somebody once a week. And so the trick is not just can I provide training and can provide education, et cetera. I love when you watch, how things are made. There's such a great definition with health and safety where the guy's operating the 100-ton punch press machine, and there isn't a sign that says, do not put your hand in the machine, right? That works. That's where they started. Do not put your hand in the machine. That's a little bit like MITRE having a sign on the way out of the building that says, no unencrypted laptops past this point, right? Well, the bad guy who's taking the data out is going to ignore the sign. What's much better is 2 buttons to operate the punch press machine. because you don't need any training at all. You have to use both buttons. If you're dumb enough to duct tape down one button, stick your hand in the punch press, push the other button, you deserve to lose your hand. It was the intended action that you were trying to result. So I think that's also an interesting piece of the puzzle is, how do we get to the point where the actual execution of the process no longer involves the human being involved from a training, education, et cetera. We can take any 16-year-old kid and make him operate a 100-ton punch press machine and not cut his hands off if there are two buttons to make it go.
So make it simple, make it a natural part of the process of doing business.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
I'd add 2 points of refinement. These compliance regimes, which you were talking about, they're a path, they're a checklist, but compliance doesn't necessarily result in the desired objective.
Now, we know that it does not result in the desired.
I'm being polite.
Okay.
I'm from Washington. We have to speak in given terms. Compliance regimes basically are a lawyer's full employment act.
Right.
You got a group of lawyers who build them, a group of lawyers who attack them, and a group of lawyers who defend them. Don't fall into that rabbit hole. Leave that alone. The other word, similar to yours, that I would caution you avoid using because of the negative albatross that it results in, is the word security. You mention security to a CEO and they become apoplectic. They think of guns, gates, and guards and owning a yacht, and money just goes down the drain. So avoid compliance regimes, avoid the concept of security, think more of asset management, because that's actually what you're focusing on.
Zero loss.
The intellectual property is an asset that needs to be protected.
Thank you very much. So without assuming that you know all the things that are being done today, some of you do, I know because you're in that business, you can assume that they don't work. So as has been said here, you could spend all the time talking about a better firewall, don't bother. That's not going to solve the problem. So instead of working on that, try to be out-of-the-box thinkers and think of things that will... And there is some hope here, by the way, because there are, even within the well-penetrated defense world, there are people who have not been penetrated. So it is possible to do this. The biggest problem is our corporations aren't doing it. If you have to unplug things from the internet, go ahead and unplug them. If you have to reduce access from 10,000 people to 3 people, go ahead. Whatever it takes, daily reviews, weekly reviews, monthly reviews of personnel, who cares? I think your comment about don't worry about the law sounds funny, but it's true, because the law can be changed. But we can't afford to continue to lose crown jewel IP at the rate that we've been losing it.
Mark, can I use an example that might be fun to use for people? So the test case is we get to handle the new Star Wars movie for 3 weeks before release. Okay? And what we should do is be able to tell the world at large, we have been provided the new Star Wars movie, and we've got it for 3 weeks.
The trouble is that's not crown jewel. It would be a good target.
The point is just that it's a very high value target.
Yeah.
If you were to make it a high value target, you would basically shut down the entire hacking community for 3 weeks, because showing that movie on some screen on the side of a building would be the ultimate get. And so it's an interesting context. It kind of gets away from, it puts it in a very simple context of what it means to have a piece of intellectual property that if I lose it, it loses its value very, very quickly if it's released early.
Yeah.
And it's very high evidence that it happened.
No, I
it's sort of a
understand.
good way of an example.
But I want to keep this team focused on crown jewel intellectual property, even though that's a good test.
It could be the formula for Coke. It could be, it's an easy thing to have evidence that there's
Well, maybe you'll think of a honeypot where we'll announce something which may not even exist, the next chip from a new chip company, and it does all these magic things. It makes you rich overnight, and then see if someone can go get it using this checklist of yours.
Well, Mark, it sounds like you are describing Mission Impossible, and I look at our colleagues, and I'm going to make this wild conclusion that you're all old enough to remember the TV series Mission Impossible, where you listen to the instructions, and at the end of the instructions, this tape will self-destruct.
Right.
That's my dream solution for intellectual property. If it's taken from my machine, you die.
It goes poof. We have just a few minutes. Are there questions from the group before we send you off?
So,
Is that on, Larry?
yeah. Given how long this has gone on, are there any crown jewels that haven't been stolen that are left to protect?
Not that I know of. And so, you know, if this were a war, all the first battles have been lost.
Yeah.
And it amazes me to see the conversations about jobs without mentioning how the jobs got lost. But this is, in my understanding, this is the main reason for all the transfer of jobs, all the transfer of money that people, you know, marvel at every day in the front page of the newspaper without going deep enough to understand how that happened. However, that's not the war, that's the battle. And because inventors invent things every night, anything that you do that is intelligent and successful will begin to change the tide back in the other direction. And I don't think it takes very long in the world of technology for that to be really meaningful. So even though we're probably waiting for another 3 or 5 years for the bad result of all the thefts that have happened so far, if we tomorrow morning turn the lights off on that problem, we would start accumulating wealth again from new inventions, and from that time forward, I think, on average, we'd be wealthier and wealthier. Other questions,
it also gets
comments?
worse getting forward because your device, you can make stuff. You build general purpose machines and give them in software to build stuff, and so it gets worse going forward.
I got a new subtitle for you. All's fair in love and war and protecting IP.
Very good, Jerry. Anybody else? Comments, questions?
It's a good one, Mark.
Ty says it's a good one. Well,
good
you would know, Ty. You've been in every one of them, I think.
Yeah,
So.
it's a good one.
All right. Well, with your good assistance again, we'll see it solved. Thank you, all of you, for taking this on. I recognize it takes a lot of time and effort, and I'm sure it'll be worth it if you succeed. Good luck, and we'll talk to you on Friday.